is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Sunshine by Robin McKinley, brought to you by Rachel. This is Section 8, the second to last section of the book. And I think I can safely say, maybe accepting Fire and Hemlock, this is one of the more surreal chapters I have ever read of anything. Welcome to Spoil Me. Right, welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha, and I am really excited because it has been a minute since the last Sunshine episode, and I actually went into the Spoil Me group and was like, can somebody please come through on this for me because I am dying here. Like, y'all left me right before they were about to go into battle when Rey's basically accepting that she is going to die and just left me sitting there for like a month. So it was killing me. And I really did not know what to expect in terms of how this like huge confrontation was going to go down. And I have to confess that it was, I didn't have a firm expectation, but if you had really, held my feet to the fire and made me make a guess, this is 100% not what I was going to be expecting at all. There is so much about the way that this goes down that is really surprising to me. Like, there's, the aspect of the way that they get there, which for some reason, I didn't expect them to travel the entire way through magic. I thought that they would, travel to the outskirts of where they needed to be through magic, and then the rest of it would be actual physical traveling. I didn't expect them to make a direct assault that was visible to everybody in the nest, for lack of a better word. I didn't expect them to be so straightforward with the way that they handle taking down these vampires. There is so much about the way this goes that is so much more brave and badass, but also really foolhardy, that it became very clear because I was sort of side-eyeing Rey a little bit for her nihilism and her continued assurances that she was going to her death and ready to die and would not be coming out the other side of this, and that she was coming to terms with that and had accepted it and whatever. And I really expected them to be so much more cautious that I was not that worried about her, even though it didn't make me feel like the character was being unreasonable in what she was saying. It was just more as a reader, of course, I'm used to my protagonists coming out the other side and being okay. There is the idea that this might not be the only book. So I also felt like it was safe to say that Rey was going to be okay by the end simply because of the fact that I know the author's considering a sequel. But it did occur to me that she could be considering a sequel with a different character. And this had been meant to be the one book, so maybe it could be that she dies. But because of the way that they actually take on these vampires, I suddenly was like, okay, you know what? Your fear makes a lot more sense now, because I just couldn't understand what you were so worried about. So, with no further ado, I am going to go into my notes here and read you some of my favorite things, because I highlighted a lot of this section. So, this whole thing, the traveling, is crazy town banana pants. This, I just don't know what to even make of the way that this goes down, because okay, I'm going to read you this. I closed my eyes again. There. This may have been the light web too, or it may have been that I'd now done my compass needle maneuver several times and was getting the hang of it, or it may have been con. Some of it was con. I could feel the faint scritchy buzz of connection through our palms. There seemed to be a variety of paths laid out before us. There was the totally evisceratingly worst, the slightly less worst, but worst enough, the still really bad, the only basic deadly dire, and probably a few others. I was looking at the Catherine wheel glitter of the way that had blown out SOFHQ, and at the looming thing that was our destination, as Khan arranged us on the boundary of one of the other, the quite awful enough thanks, ways. The looming thing and its guardians didn't look so much like an aquarium this time, or if it did, those fish were sick. More like the special effects in one of those post-Holocaust movies. Any moment now, the ghastly mutants would come lurching on screen and wave their deviant limbs at us. Guys, let's just break down that one paragraph for a second here. There's a million ways to get there, and they're all terrible. She can feel a connection between her and Khan that she believes is powering her ability to access these ways. They can see their destination, which is just so strange. And, what gets me the most about how this is written is that McKinley has not established a lot of what happens and just takes it for granted that you're going to keep up with her. So this is not a section that you can skim. This is not a section that you can read as quickly as you want to be absorbing what happens, which is really something that I tend to do when I'm reading action, is that I read really quickly because I want the action in my imagination to be occurring as quickly as it's supposed to be happening in the story. That's not really possible here because you have to focus so much on what she's actually explaining to you that it takes all of your concentration to even understand the concepts that she is sending to your brain. So I'm going to read this next part. By the time we'd walked off the edge of the balcony, we were firmly, if that's quite the word I want, into other space. Vampires probably can bound lightly down from third stories, but I didn't want to try it. As it was, I was immediately having a precarious time keeping my feet. There didn't seem to be any up or down, although this is a good thing when you've just walked off a balcony, or sideways or backward or forward, or for that matter, other than the fact that we had backs and fronts and our faces were on one side of us than another. This path, whatever it was a lot worse than Khan's short way home the other night. At least I had feet, which was an improvement on Nowheresville. Hey, not only did I have feet, I got to keep my clothes on. I could still see the looming thing that was what we were aiming for, and since I didn't know anything about the protective detail, I assumed that my function was to keep watching it. So again, it's almost like I'm not just needing as a reader to keep up, but Ray is also needing to keep up. I assumed that my function was to keep watching it. I'm going to say it. Ray, you all should have figured this shit out first. You shouldn't have to be assuming that your function is anything. Y'all are going to what you believe is your death. At least make it worthwhile and plan that shit out first. Look, I'm a planner. We all know this. I don't go into shit without thinking every detail that I could think of all the way through. It bothered the hell out of me that she's like, well, I figured that I was supposed to do this. Oh my God. You should not be figuring anything. You should know. Y'all should have talked about this. He seemed to know up from down and sideways from sideways. I felt things whiz past me occasionally. And while I couldn't have told you what they were, I could guess they weren't friendly. Every time I set my foot down, it seemed to resolve the place I was in a little more, as if my invading three-dimensionality was making my surroundings coagulate, and little by little there seemed to be another sort of stepping stone system after all, although rather than the ordinary world sluicing by between the stones, it seemed to boil up and become part of the no up, no down, no anything else. I felt as if I would like to be sick, but fortunately my stomach couldn't figure out which way was up either, so it stayed where it was. Wow. The surroundings coagulate around each of her steps. That is a really cool image. So they're in No Town, and this is the moment where things got more surprising for me, because when they reach No Town, I fully expect them to come back into the world, to, okay, we have reached the outskirts, and now we have to figure out our way in. I don't know why I thought that, except that I think it's me being sort of like mentally I'm used to situations like the Dresden Files where things are warded or traveling is not as predictable. And so you like stepping right into something using magic is a high risk because you don't actually know exactly where you're going to end up. Or, you know, traveling you might not be able to bring all of your tools with you. There's really not a whole lot of traveling from place to place using magic in Dresden Files that is not sanctioned through pre-made doorways in like the Never Never. So you have to find the nearest doorway to wherever you want to go and figure out the rest of your movement from there. I guess I figured that with them, although I knew that they technically could go anywhere they wanted, I figured that the vampires would have things set up so that people could not just like materialize in their presence. I don't know if that's even possible. I don't know about vampires using wards and charms and things like that against human beings, if that's really a thing. I'm not even sure. But in short, that is not how this is handled at all. We were in No Town. As we went on, still used advisedly, we flickered more clearly into No Town. Sometimes we took a step or two on broken pavement as if we were actually there. Maybe we were. There were now other sporadic people present also. I didn't like the look of any of them. We passed several nightclubs with people wandering in and out. If you could walk where you wanted to. I'm really bad at reading today. And she describes No Town and like the fact that people who like live in downtown high rises would even come down here to feel like they were slumming it. Meanwhile, outdoors, if you fell down, you lay there, and people still ambulatory stepped over you. Horizontal bodies were part of the ambiance. Maybe you got rolled while you were lying there being ambient. Maybe you got taken home for dinner. To be dinner. It wasn't a good place to linger in for anyone. Anyone alive, that is. But there was another myth that if you were high enough, the suckers would leave you alone because your blood would screw them up. I don't think this is something I'd want to rely on myself. There are ne'er-do-wells among the others like there are among us humans, and my guess is there are suckers who've developed a taste for screwed-up blood. Also, if you're hungry enough, you'll eat anything, right? And the still-breathing body face down in a gutter is real easy to, catch. So I like that as much as we're going through the most insane traveling experience, it's still... there's time for McKinley to step aside and give us a little taste of this world still. There's so much to this world. It kills me that there's only one book. There is a ton here. How do you just leave this place alone after you create something like this? I don't know how she managed to walk away. Like, that's the main reason I feel that there are more than one book for a lot of these really in-depth built worlds, is not just, the author wants to make money and write more. It's like, after you build a world that feels convincing to you, you don't just leave it there. You can't do that. The stories just begin to happen in your head because you've created everything else there, and it needs to be fleshed out. And so these lives begin to like unfold in your head. I know that you all said that there was a rumor she was writing another one, but it's just crazy to me that that's only a rumor, that she isn't compelled to keep writing on this. Like this, if I were somebody who wrote fan fiction, this would be the richest soil of anything out there that I can think of, because there are a lot of rules, but there's also a lot of potential. So you've got some things to ground you and make very obvious, like obstacles and issues, but there's also such a huge expanse of unexplored ideas and, just types of creatures that we've not seen. This is like catnip, people need to read this book. So I was having trouble staying upright as we winked back and forth between worlds. If when visible I was staggering a little, I would fit right in. I was a little afraid I might see someone I knew. Gods and angels, never underestimate the power of social conditioning. Even under the circumstances when I was fully expecting never having to face or explain anything to anyone ever again after the next few minutes or hours or time fragments splintered by chaos space, I was worried about this, that I might see Kenny, or his friends, or some of the younger, dumber regulars, regulars at Charlie's, or even what remained of a few of the guys my age I knew who hadn't got back out of drugs again. What was I afraid of? That they might see me, too, holding hands with a vampire? That I would look as if I was merely under the dark and going to the usual fate of a human seen in a company of a vampire? I was supposed to care? I really like that moment too, because I think we all have like moments like that in our lives where we are in some situation really deep and all of a sudden become irrationally like fixated on, oh no, but what if this? And it's like, yeah, what if that? What are you kidding me right now? That's the thing you're thinking about? What are you doing? It's just the sort of thing that makes you like, start giggling when you're at the funeral of somebody that you really love and miss. It's like you start to think about something and it just like hooks you almost as a, protection method. Your brain is protecting itself. Coping mechanism, I guess one would say. So I didn't know what any humans might be making of us, but I began to see vampires looking back at us. I didn't have any trouble recognizing them. I didn't know if this was because they weren't bothering to try to pass, or if I just knew a vampire when I saw one these days. I didn't notice when the first one did more than look, when the first one came at us. So again, I'm assuming, as a reader, like a fool, like a goddamn fool, that if they're traveling in this magical method, they're safe. That nothing's going to be able to get to them until they solidify into wherever. But the thing that I'm not taking into account is that they are momentarily solidified into wherever, and then jumping back into it, and then out, and then in, and then out. So they are able to be nabbed if somebody is fast enough, and guess fucking what? Vampires are fast enough, guys. This had not occurred to me. This had not occurred to me at all, and I feel really stupid. Also, she's calling it other space. The place that they're traveling in when they're not firmly in the world. So I should have known that's kind of their jam, and maybe they could even follow you into there. But I wanted so desperately in my heart for there to be some place safe that they could go to as their like escape route that I did not let myself think about the reality of how any of this was going to work. It's sort of like, it reminds me of a version of when you have a fandom that is, or not a fandom, you have a property that has like a crew of people that have like a headquarters, and even as much as other bad shit may happen, they always wind up having their headquarters to go back to that's familiar. And this can be anything. It could be like the Bronze in Buffy, or like Giles's shop, or, things like that. But then something happens and that place is gone. And as a viewer, you didn't realize how much importance you placed on them having that sort of sanctuary and safe house. And for me, them being able to travel into like a magic parallel world together was my version of a safe house, like at least mentally, but I really figured physically also. And so when they start getting attacked here, when they're still jumping around, I was straight up like, this is just unfair. What the fuck? I didn't notice when the first one did more than look when the first one came at us. I didn't notice till Khan had, never mind. He did it with his other hand, and with the hand that held mine, jerked us back into chaos space. He wiped the splatter of blood off his face with his forearm, except there was blood on his arm, too. I was afraid I'd see him lick his lips. I didn't. Maybe I didn't watch long enough. Maybe, used blood isn't of much interest. My hand trembled in his, in the hand of my lethal vampire companion. I was alive, human, with a beating heart. I was all alone. The next time there were several of them. This time Khan jerked us out of chaos space because he then had to let go of my hand. I was glad I didn't have to find out what would happen if I got left there alone without him. I wasn't glad for very long. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Note to myself in my next life, get some martial arts training. Get a lot of martial arts training, just in case. Again, as with the first vampire who attacked us, something happened quicker than I could follow, quicker than I wanted to follow, and I yanked my gaze away, afraid of what my dark vision might make out for me. There was blood again, but there was also at least one vampire left over, while Khan was otherwise engaged, and he was looking at me. I looked at him, not thinking about anything but my own terror, my eyes wide open so wide that they hurt. He met that gaze. Hey, he knew a human when he saw one, and he knew he was a vampire. And I saw him falter. And then Khan had turned from whatever he was doing and took care of that one too fast for me to look away. I think I probably cried out. Jesse wasn't going to rescue me this time. I wasn't going to come to myself with human arms around me and a human voice shouting in my ear, "It's all over, you're all right." There was now quite a lot of blood and bits and pieces. I had blood on me too. Khan seized my hand again and said sharply, "Come." I didn't dare look in his face. There would be no comfort, no reassurance in the face of any vampire. When I took a running step to keep up with him, my shoes slipped in the blood. There was so much blood on our hands that as it dried, our fingers stuck together. The meaty smell was a miasma, a poison gas. So here goes something that I really want to talk about, which is the way that she talks about the tactile aspects of being in this fight. Because later on, there's a moment where Khan kind of gets into this absolute frenzy of fighting. I would like to just say right now, Khan is fucking scary and can apparently whip through like a crowd of younger vampires like he's the Tasmanian devil and just shred them. And I had no idea he was capable of this kind of, not the violence itself, the sheer volume of it, really. Because I think that's what had it in my head, that they were going to have to stop outside of wherever they were trying to get to and sneak in, was my assumption that Khan was not going to be able to take on a bunch of vampires on his own. Wrong again. Also, assuming that Ray, that Sunshine herself, wouldn't be super useful in a fight. Wrong. She's not great. Like, she's not trained, but she winds up doing some serious damage that is really something. So there's a moment that I actually found funny, where after he gets out of his frenzy, he sort of like comes at her snarling in this way that makes her think that he's still caught up in the frenzy and doesn't even recognize her and may come after her. And so I'm going to read you this because it just was so amusing to me. I was probably off in my feeble little human she's in shock, wrap her in a blanket and get out the whiskey space. Humans don't deal with extreme situations very well. Our pathetic bodies freak out. We freeze and our blood pressure falls. And we can't think and all that. I stood there staring while Khan snarled and showed me his teeth and didn't offer me the blanket or the whiskey or the hot sweet tea. I love that moment. Khan, buddy, where's the blanket? So this is the part with the tactile, because he's saying this to her, or he's looking at her like this because she used her friggin' knife to kill a vampire again, because she's got some sort of sunlight imbued in this knife, which shouldn't really work the way that it does, but it does. And so she just killed one and it basically like exploded all over her. So she's covered in blood, and she describes it thusly. I wish I could forget how it feels. Your hair stuck to your skull with blood. Foul blood running gummily down inside your clothes, invading your privacy, your decency, your humanity, till it chafes you with every breath, every movement, the tug of it as it dries on your skin, feeling like some kind of snare. Blood in your mouth that you cannot spit the vile taste of away. I think I must have gone into some kind of berserker fury myself. There are things you don't want to know you can do, aren't there? But if you're lucky, you never find them out. I found out too many of them all at once. I, who had to leave the kitchen at Charlie's when they were whacking up meat into joints or putting slabs of drippy, pulpy, maroony red stuff through the grinder. Blood stings when it gets in your eyes, and it's viscous, so it's hard to blink out again. It may not only be because the blood stings that you're weeping. That is some shit right there. I mean, guys, seriously. The tug of it as it dries on your skin, feeling like some kind of snare. Invading your privacy, your decency, your humanity, dripping inside your clothes. Like, that is real good stuff. That's good ass writing right there. Like, that's the kind of shit that I do not think about. I have been reading a lot of supernatural stuff, and it's usually, I was totally covered in blood. That does not get across what this paragraph gets across at all. At all. Like, that's a this is really getting across the fucked upness of being covered in blood, of what it means, and of how alien the feel is, because most of us don't walk around like this. So it's so memorable because it's so different that it's just not something that you forget as much as you may want to. Rosalie, that's some real shit. It really is. That's probably, out of this entire book, one of my favorite like paragraphs of the whole thing, because I had to stop. I had to stop for a second and be like, oh my God, and like reread it, because I could feel it as she was describing that. Like, have you guys ever been caught in the rain in a real rainstorm without any umbrella or a roof or protection of any kind, and suddenly really realize what it is to be wet, to like feel the rainwater dribbling down inside your clothing? There is a feeling of like, oh, how dare you invading my body space? Like, the idea of blood doing that, rainwater is pure and good and lovely. And that's even like, no, that's my space. You don't get to do that, rain. Blood? Fucking absolutely not. I do not think so. No, thank you ever. Nope. Nope. Oh my God. So, she says, I stopped using my knife. I found out I didn't have to. I found out I could do it with my hands. Girl, what? it was still mostly con that we got through. Even warded up the wazoo and covered in bright gold cobweb, I was still only human. I was still slower and weaker than any vampire. But I had con, and I was warded and webbed, and the vampires didn't like tangling with me. They kept choosing to tangle with con, even though they could see, graphically, what had happened to the last vampire, or 12, or 27, or 4,008 vampires that had tangled with con. If we ever got to the end of all this, ha ha, and so on, and wanted to find our way back out of the maze, it wasn't a thread we would have to follow, but a path paved with undead body parts. Maybe they thought they'd wear him out or something. I still got a few. You'd think offing a few vampires would feel like doing a community service, wouldn't you? It doesn't. Not even when they don't explode. That's why I started doing it with my hands. They didn't explode, I discovered, if I merely jammed my fingers in under their breastbones and pulled. What if I merely jammed my fingers under their breastbones and pulled? What that is... That... I mean, this is not a one-time deal, guys. I want to reiterate. She didn't do this once in desperation and be like, oh, thank God that worked. She started doing this. Like, this is a thing. Yanking out the hearts of the vampires from their ribs. From under their breastbones. That's insane. What? Oh my God, I can't. This is all so unexpected is really what it is for me. That I just did not think it was going to be this kind of absolute gore fest. And I'm not at all sorry for it. You know, don't get me wrong. But I really thought this was going to be like a duck and weave stealth operation trying to like get through. And it's just a full-on frontal attack where they're ripping out hearts. And it's just so much more intense than anything that I had in mind. I would have liked to give up. I meant to give up, but I couldn't. Like I couldn't stay at home and hide under the bed, I guess. Maybe it was promising Khan to stick around as long as I could. Stick seemed the right verb under the circumstances. Every time I lifted one of my blood-clotted shoes, there was a sticky, ripping noise. Ugh, guys. Oh my God. Yuck. It's like the nasty old movie theater times 1,000. Like, you guys been to those kinds of movie theaters where they just have not mopped the floor, where people spilled soda and who knows what else on the floor for the past, 15 years? Oh my God. So I understood that I was crazy to be still alive, crazy to be doing what I was doing to stay alive, crazy to be trying to stay alive. This knowingness about Khan was a strange island in a strange ocean. That sense of Khan's presence, of his precise location, had undoubtedly saved my life several times in the carnage if it hadn't done much for my sanity. But it meant that when things suddenly went quiet and I felt some vampire, coming noiselessly up behind me, I knew it was Khan. Well, well, said a silent voice from an invisible speaker. This meeting has been much more amusing than I anticipated. So, okay, guys, this is talking right into her head, right? When she says coming from an invisible speaker, she doesn't mean a speaker that's mounted up on the wall with a Bose logo on it, right? She means speaker like the person doing the speaking is invisible and talking right into her head. That's my assumption here. So this voice evidently has a power of its own, the voice itself, which I hadn't expected. And there's just so much about this that I did not expect. I feel like I'm saying, I didn't expect this. I haven't expected that over and over again, but it's full of surprises and I really, really like it. So this voice is almost like trying to drive her crazy. It's meant to drive human beings crazy. It could even drive vampires crazy, apparently. So she says, when Bo spoke again, I snapped back together, body and mind. I could almost hear the clunk as the bolts slotted into place, trapping me with myself again. I may have hated and feared myself now, but I hated and feared Beauregard worse. Welcome, welcome. Do come in. Welcome between us, Connie, has been a curious affair for some years now. I imagine you haven't been too surprised. Perhaps you explained it to your companion. I hope so, Connie. It would have been rude of you to omit the explanation, I feel. And you've always been the soul of courtesy, haven't you? Your little human, Connie, is very enterprising. She's been nosing around me for some little while. I'm surprised, Connie, that you would allow a human to do your, shall I say, dirty work? You must have found your experience a few months ago more debilitating than I realized. Or perhaps more corrupting. I blanked out when Bo laughed, like you blank out when you're conked on the head. It's not a voluntary response. Maybe I should have been insulted that I was being ignored. I wasn't. I didn't want him to say anything to me. The mere experience, I won't call it sound, of his voice was like having the skin peeled off me. The skin I hadn't wanted to fit myself back inside a few moments ago. Very, very distantly, it occurred to me that if I was feeling a little brighter, I might find it funny that Bo seemed to be accusing me of being a bad influence on a vampire, but I wasn't feeling brighter. Oh, yes, I am here waiting for you. Do keep coming on. After all, you've worked quite hard to progress so far, have you not? It would be a pity to waste all that effort. And I really don't feel I could let you go now without paying your respects to me personally. It would be so rude. And wasn't I just saying, Connie, that you are the soul of courtesy? The voice itself was flaying me alive. What was left of my mind and will were addled with the effort to remain myself. Slowly, painfully, I moved my right hand, slid it stickily into my pocket, and closed my gummy and aching fingers around my little knife. It wasn't hot anymore, but the painful pressure of the voice eased a little. I dropped my eyes, and through the smeary muck on my forearms I could see the occasional gleam of golden webbing. Do walk on, please. That please seemed to last a century. Walking on being precisely what he was trying to prevent us from doing by the non-sound of his voice, I squeezed my knife till I could feel it grinding into my palm and took a step forward. So did Con. He didn't take my hand again, but as we moved, his shoulder brushed mine. I realized it was important not to appear to be struggling. Con could probably have moved faster without me, but he didn't. He waited. So I raised my other foot and took another step. And another. Con matched me, and with every step we touched briefly on the shoulder or arm or back of hand. There was a sort of quiver against my breast, as if the chain that hung there was rearranging itself. You must be tired, said the voice. You are walking so slowly. But I heard it too. He was losing this round, as he had lost the first one, because we weren't paralyzed and helpless, because I wasn't dying under the scourge of his voice. I wondered how much worse it would be if he said my name. It became easier as we went on. He'd withdrawn, I guess, plotting his next move. So this is really cool. Basically, this dude's telling them to come at him in this taunting way because he really assumes they won't be able to. And surprise, motherfucker, they can. You wrong, dum-dum. Oh my God. is there anything quite as satisfying as a smug bad guy realizing that he very, very badly miscalculated? And it's such a slow burn here too, as he starts to realize that he like isn't dealing with an ordinary human being. She's not just what did they call it, a transmuter? Like, she just isn't just like a magic handler. That's not it. Her magic is based in sunlight. She is very specifically designed, if one could argue, if you believe in a higher power, to combat beings like him. So she keeps walking forward, and there's this moment. We were in a huge room. There were enormous pipes and the remains of scaffolding and machinery. This is the vision, I believe, that she had when she was going through one of the bad spots down by the lake. Correct me if I'm wrong. But, she saw that when she was going, she saw something very similar to this at any rate. And it was unclear if she was seeing something that had happened to somebody who died there and she was getting like the impression of their memories. If she was seeing something that had led to whatever bad thing had happened in the spot she was in. Or if she was seeing something that had happened to one of the guys in the car with her, which one would assume no, because people don't escape vampires. But it was a really unclear thing. And now it appears that she was seeing the future. She was seeing something that was going to happen. And I'm really curious if this is like specific to her, or if these bad spots show instances of the future to other people as well. If this is not just because she's a magic handler, or she is, I don't know. If this is if the bad spots tend to show the future to other human beings also. So I felt his eyes on me. Look at me, they said. It wasn't a voice this time, or even a compulsion like the drag a rope has around my neck. Not looking into his eyes felt like trying to prevent my heart from beating. But I didn't look, and my heart continued to beat. The dais was a tall one, and on the steps up to it lounged several more vampires. They were all watching us with interest. I could see the glitter of eyes. So I was still alive at the moment, and it seemed ridiculous even as it occurred to me, but I was angry. I'd had my life ruined by this disgusting undead monster. I had nothing to lose. All the best stuff in the books, and sometimes in history too, gets done by people who have nothing left to lose, and so aren't always looking over their shoulders for the way out after it's over. I thought wistfully that I'd rather be looking over my shoulder for the way out, but I wasn't. I was about to die. But if I could take him, the bow thing, with me, it would have been worth it. The thought flamed up in me, like the sun coming up over the horizon. Yes, it will be worth it. I took my hand out of my pocket. Now all I had to do was do it. We reached the bottom of the dais. Those eyes were still pulling at me. Deliberately, consciously, voluntarily, I lifted my own eyes and met them. Monster didn't begin to cover it. Ironically, the greeting we'd had from his guard corps had done me a service. I think if I hadn't already been shocked beyond my capacity, I wouldn't have survived the initial blow of looking into the eyes of the master. Maybe it was a good thing I'd already lost my soul, that I was already half out of my body, my mind, my life, because it meant I wasn't there to meet the full force of Beau's gaze. It was bad enough anyway. The distillation of hundreds of years of evil shimmering in those eyes, and his enjoyment of my looking at it. But he also expected me to crack, to disintegrate immediately. He thought that as soon as I looked into his eyes, it would all be over. Never mind that I could apparently look into ordinary vampires' eyes. That happened occasionally. I saw this in his eyes too, and I thought, it did? Remember this. The part of me that was looking forward to finishing dying said, what for? Beau was a master vampire. He could destroy vampires with his glare. A mere human would incinerate on the spot. Oh, and his eyes were colorless. Did I say that? I hadn't thought of evil as being without color, but it is. Once you get past plain, everyday wickedness, the color is squeezed right out of it. Evil is a kind of oblivion, having destroyed everything on its way there. Yo, this is so rad. I'm going to read this next part, and then I want to put a theory forth that may or may not actually have been done consciously. I did go up in flames, but they weren't the flames he had anticipated. The light web blazed up like a lit fuse running back to the detonator, the bomb snaking along the ground as it had been laid out. A slender tongue of fire began in a curl on the back of each of my hands. They ran up my arms, licking along the lines of the lattice across my breast. The chain around my neck flared. Into my scalp, I could feel my hair rising, waving in the fire, or perhaps it became fire, running down my back, my belly, my legs. The lighting of that fuse was looking into Beau's eyes. I was on fire. I put one flaming foot on the first stair of the dais and stepped up. I was still staring into Beau's eyes. I felt rather than saw the vampires on the dais slither together and descend on Khan. I don't know if they saw me burst into flames or not. I don't know if they were the sort of flames that anyone sees, even vampires. If they did see the light web ignite, presumably they thought it was to do with their master having me well in hand, and they could afford to concentrate on Khan. But Beau gave me another gift as I toiled up the dais stairs towards him, letting me see briefly, out of his eyes, to the bottom of the dais behind me. I saw the other vampires pull Khan down. The vampires around Beau's dais would be the elite, of course, as the welcoming committee had been the cannon fodder, and as I say, I'm not sure that vampires get tired exactly, but they can come to the end of their strength. I thought now, as I flamed, that Khan might have given me more of his remaining strength than I had realized, more than he could spare. So she sees a vision of the vampires tearing Khan apart. And I believed this was happening 100%. But she's so determined to take this motherfucker down that she does not let that stop her for a single moment, which I respected so deeply and admired so much, because Khan would be so pissed if he, died and she just stopped out of, sentiment and concern for him and ruined everything. And then later, it turns out that Khan did not have his heart ripped out, as it apparently looked like. It seems like somebody got to him in one way or another, but there's this suggestion that Beau sent her an image that was not true just to fuck with her, which seems 100% possible. So yeah, this whole moment here, we had talked about the way that McKinley treats the aftermath of her capture and escape as sort of feeling like an allegory to, or a metaphor for being sexually assaulted. That the remaining trauma of it is very reminiscent of somebody recovering from being abducted and raped, or somebody who was drugged, or any number of things. Basically, having no autonomy, being out, not being in control of what happens to your body, and knowing that you're completely at the mercy of whoever has you, and knowing that even though you got away, that could happen again at any time. That this is hanging over your head, this knowledge that ultimately you don't get to protect yourself, which is a terrifying thing to know. And you can know it in the abstract if you have not experienced it. But if you have, you get the trauma of that experience on top of the knowledge that it's possible. And there are many women out there who have experienced rape more than once. I can't imagine the kind of nightmare it is to experience it once, but to be raped more than once is the kind of thing that feels like it shouldn't be allowed in the scope of events in the world. Like, that's just so cruel and horrifying. And this moment, when she's coming at Beau, and he has sent all of his people at her, and he then tries to keep her from even walking forward. And when she's able to keep walking, he tries to disintegrate her by getting her to make eye contact with him. This all feels like a revenge fantasy, a little bit, of a woman who was hurt, getting back at the monster who did this to her in this sort of overarching, less personal way in some ways. Like, it becomes personal right at the end, but there's this vibe to me that I could not shake as I read this, that all of the cannon fodder and all of the vampires that they face initially are like the variety of bullshit men that women often have to put up with from day to day, that at first scare you, and then you start to realize how pathetic they are, and that many of them are ultimately not going to harm you in a physical way, but they deserve to be shredded. Like, she starts to get really good at just ripping their hearts out, literally reaching up inside and ripping their hearts out. And it fucks her up that she has to keep doing this, but it's like the only way to get through. And it's like this really weird vision that I had in my head of like progressing from like the comments section on an article about a woman who was assaulted and ripping through all of the trolls in that comment section to then getting to some of the people who like maybe wrote the really shitty article or are in support of the person who, like, somebody standing for Brett Kavanaugh, for example, is like the next tier. And then you get to people who are actually in power and supporting this garbage. And then you get to the actual guy. And the actual guy is a twofer, I think, of the person who committed the assault, but also, I'm getting really emotional talking about this. This is surprising me. I feel like when she describes him as like a coalesced, like, what's the word I want? The distilled evil, I think she says. She describes the way that his flesh isn't really even flesh, that it's like a gel that's kept together by pure malice. This makes me feel like Beau isn't just the guy that did this. Beau is the system that lets them keep doing it. Beau is patriarchy and rape culture and everything. The malice, you know, like his voice was a manifestation of malignancy. For he had no tongue, no larynx. His eyes were the purest imagination of evil, flawless in a way that flesh could never be. The scar on my breast burst apart and my poisoned blood ran down. Guys, like, this is a lot. And I don't know if this was on purpose. Like, I don't know if she wrote it thinking this or what. And I love the fact that it's not super obvious. Like, it's something that I started to get a gut feeling about. But I like to think that it was on purpose. Ugh. And that, like, her touching him, I knew that if I touched him, I would be recreated into such as he was. And I'm really concerned about that because, spoiler alert, she touches him and I don't know what that does. I really don't, and I'm really concerned. And then he laughs at her. He laughs because the scar bursts open. And he laughs. And like, if that isn't so many women's experience of finally telling somebody what happened to them. And not only not being believed, but being told it was either their fault or accusing them of lying out of malice themselves. Making it into a joke. The people that I saw making jokes, I couldn't believe that it was as bad as it was. I knew how bad I thought it was, and that was bad enough. But then to see it turned into a fucking joke was so sick. And I mean that word. Sick. Specifically. Wrong. Corrupt. Like there's an infection that you need to like cut out. You know? Like sick, like something that needs to be amputated. That's blackened and rotting. Ugh. Glad I have tissues right here. This damn Spoil Me is like, I feel like every book I finish, I'm fucking crying. Ugh. So, he laughs. And that laugh is the fucking mistake because it provides the opening for what she does. She takes out the daylight charm. Guys, listen to this. I'm gonna die again reading this, but I'm gonna read it. I didn't look at it, but I felt the tiny sun spin and blaze, the trees shake its leaves. Yes! The deer raise her head, acknowledging her own death, watching it come toward her. I felt the moving line of the water barrier around its edge. As Bo laughed, I threw the charm down the noisome hole that indicated his mouth. A little tracery of fire followed it like an arrow carrying a rope across a chasm. The mouth hole closed with a sucking sound, something an ear could hear. What there was that was left of him in the real world wavered and became vulnerable to reality again, as the force and concentration of his will faltered in surprise. Surprise and pain. The fire, my fire, ran up his face. His eyes. No, I can't say. But he had been strong and evil and undead for such a long time, and I had been alive and human for such a short time. My little fire wavered and began to ebb. His face writhed. He was about to speak. So he makes this strange sound, and she thinks that he's maybe trying to say her name. Beauregard, I shouted, I destroy you. And I put my hands into the mire of his chest and wrenched out his heart. Listen, if that's not the most satisfying fucking thing I ever heard, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love that Khan was like the Tasmanian devil, but that he was not the one that winds up getting Bo in the end. I love that she faces off with Bo alone. I love that Bo does not even lift a hand to stop her because he is so confident that he's going to be able to overpower her with merely mental fuckery that he's literally laughing in her face when she takes him down because he's that fucking cocky. Y'all, that's some good shit. And she basically passes out. And comes to, and the building is beginning to fall down around her. And what Khan says is, "You have undone Bo. He cannot put himself back together," which is such a crazy way to say that. Not he's gone, but that the pieces can't be put back together. That's something. "You have succeeded. This is your victory. But there is much of his animus released by the final destruction of his body. This place is being pulled to pieces. I cannot carry you through. Listen to me." So this is a moment that I wasn't sure what the outcome was going to be, because he comes and realizes that she's dying, really dying, and gives her some of his blood in order to bring her back to herself and give her the strength to run out of the building because he can't carry her. And I don't remember hearing what the and we may have, and I just forgot it, but what the rules are in this universe for making a vampire. But I was very concerned that he was turning her. I don't think that's the case, but if it is, it would make a little bit of sense. I wouldn't hate it. But it seems like it didn't actually work that way. What it seems like is that this is a little bit more of like a Sookie Stackhouse True Blood situation, where vampire blood is like a drug, basically, that can give you a surge of energy and strength for a little while. She almost stops him from doing this to her because she doesn't know that she wants to keep on living. But then she realizes, you know what? I do want to try. I do want to do this. So it ends up with her thinking to herself as she's running out with him that maybe it would have been better to die, but she doesn't it's so much different than the kind of sincere acceptance that she had going into this. The thought of maybe it would have been better to die is much more of like a hypothetical, I wonder, versus a sort of nihilistic, this is inevitable attitude. Oh, I forgot this actually, because she says, Khan may be right that I cannot be turned. Oh, I forgot that she said that. So yeah, what he's doing couldn't have turned her, probably. She doesn't know that for sure, but I'm going to guess he's probably right. I missed the little hot lump of the seal against my leg. The chain swept back and forth across my breast in time with my running footsteps, but slowly, weighted by the thick poisoned blood of the reopened scar. My sun self, my tree self, my dear self, don't they outweigh the dark self? Not anymore. So she runs with Khan, who seems to know the way out. For this moment, I seem to be committed to the idea of trying to stay alive. Then they're running out a corridor and they run outside. Maybe I didn't have time to die when I ran back into the real world, or maybe I was too surprised. We ran straight into the arms of a division of SOF. Surprise, bitches! I should have expected SOF to be there because I guess they have sensors all over the place for magical activity, and what just happened there is primo magical activity. That's some earth-shaking type shit. But I'm sorry, Rosalie, I had my Kindle open and I didn't see all of your comments. That she points out that he said that she can't be turned. Oh, and says, and we will look at it and listen to it, and even that will not destroy us. I sure fucking hope you're right, lady. I really do. So this SOF thing, I don't know what is going to happen. I feel like Khan has to get staked immediately, right? There's no way he's running out of this building and he's a vampire and they appear I would imagine SOF has a means of detecting who's a vampire pretty easily. I mean, earlier she said that they were going from place to place and that she could tell now much more easily because they weren't passing. But she wasn't positive that that was why, that it was just because they weren't trying to pass, or maybe it was the way that she was traveling that allowed her to see. But I feel like SOF must have a way of being able to tell pretty quickly whether somebody is a vampire or not, even if they're trying to pass. But it would take a lot of presence of mind for him to be trying to pass at this moment. I don't know how fast he can, like, make that happen, if he can. And it does seem like when there are people running out of a building that is collapsing, you're going to see whoever comes out of there as probably the enemy, right? Like, plus they're both going to be covered in blood. Like, it's just not going to look good. And if she's with him, she mentions earlier that if some of her friends saw them, that they might think that she was under the dark, like under his influence. So even if they're holding hands, it could be very easily assumed that she's not doing this willingly, because they don't know how much she's able to resist vampire influence. And I don't know what she tells SOF, you know? First of all, I stand by that. I think Khan is gonna die, but if he does, that's such a bummer way for it to happen that I feel like it can't go down that way. But I don't know. And I don't know what she tells SOF about what happened, because now it doesn't seem like she has anything left to lose. But then I remember her talking about SOF, like, wanting to do, like, experiments on her, and figure out exactly what it is about her that makes it so that she has a different sort of resistance, so that they could, you know, maybe recreate that and sell it essentially as like a protective thing. So yeah, I'm just not, like, I was saying to myself, she has nothing left to lose now because Beau's already dead, but that's not true. Like, SOF has its own agenda that they could easily sort of conscript her for, which would totally change her life and probably ruin it. She's not interested in that. So yeah, I'm just not really sure how this could go down. Makes me think of in Buffy when Spike was trying to pass as human and put on that terrible American accent. I'm just a friend of Xander's here. Yeah, that's so funny because, like, the fact James Marsters' accent was not real. So he's an American pretending to be a Brit, pretending to be an American, which is just so many layers of crazy. Rosalie, have you listened to the Dresden Files audiobooks and his voices in there? Oh man, he's good. So yeah, so that's the end of this section. And it was just really, really good, guys. I'm so glad that I got to read the next section of this. I was dying. I think it's been at least 3 weeks. I'm going to look on my calendar right now just to, like, see, since the last one. October 1st was my birthday. Yeah. September 26th was the last one. So it's been a month. And I was just like, oh my God, when do I get to know how the battle went? I don't even understand how this is going to go down. I can't. And, oh man, I was dying. So many, many thanks to Rachel for, commissioning the second to last one. And then Rosalie jumped in and commissioned the very, very final one. So I'll be wrapping this one up next week and I'm super excited. Yeah. Is there anything, Rosalie, that you want to ask me before I wrap this episode up? I feel like there's nothing really that I can theorize on yet beyond what I have already. So, all right, cool. Well, thank you all so much for listening. She says that was a lot, wasn't it? Yes, it was. I did not expect to get so emotional talking about it. You know, it's one of those things that in my mind, it's a very, like, kind of, there's a lot of, like, rational, logical, putting two and two together and drawing lines between things. But once I start to talk about what it really means, it brings up something that my logical, like, sort of detached mind did not want to really think about. Because why would you want to think about it? Because it's terrible. Spoiler alert. All right, guys. Well, join me at, I believe it's 3:30. Let me take a look here. I'm back in September now. Yes, 3:30. I'm going to be doing the next installment of Six of Crows, which I have been really looking forward to getting back to also. So come and hit me up at 3:30, about an hour and change from now. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.